Hello, everybody. This is Mark. I'm at Altadena Library District. I'm among coworkers, so I'm wearing a mask. Welcome to Tarot Class with Erin K. Smith. Now, some of you know Erin, and some of you don't. Erin is a notable tarot reader in our area of Los Angeles and probably all across the city, because Erin has a mobile van called the Vardo van, which is an amazing delivery van, which she has artistically recreated with stained glass windows and wood floors, and it's absolutely gorgeous. You can often see it in Atwater Village and various other places all around town. In fact, you may have even seen it from afar and not known. And that's a beautiful, wonderful place to get a tarot reading, of course, when things are back to normal. Anyway, I urge you to visit Erin's website. Her full name is Erin K. Smith, and I'll pop the address into the chat a little later. What we're going to do today is Erin's going to give you a history lesson, and then talk about the tarot itself, talk about the cards and their meanings, and then once we finished, Erin's finished with the class portion of our session, Erin's going to do some readings. Maybe 3, maybe 2, it depends how they go, because sometimes readings are to the point and sometimes they're a little longer, so we'll play it by ear. And how we're going to do the readings is this. If you've never had a reading before, please put your name in the chat. I mean, your name's going to show up, but put in you've never had a reading, and you have to have a question, because you don't have to go to a tarot reading and ask a question. But it does help, and that's what we want to do today, because we're kind of showing people how a spread works and how Erin will read in response to cards and a specific question. So, of course, you have to be comfortable sharing the question, and then I'll read it aloud, or and we'll kick off from there with the reading. So that's how that will go. So again, only people who haven't had readings before, and you have to ask a question and pop it into chat. And I'll be selecting those, and that'll be for the latter portion of the show or the class. Okay, so without further ado, I'm gonna hand things over to Erin K. Smith.
Thank you so much for that really warm introduction, Mark. I want to thank Mark Parsons and the Altadena Public Library for inviting me today to give this talk to you. It's an honor to be here. I appreciate all the work that the public libraries do, serving the community, providing information and resources and books to everybody who wants or needs it. So that's great. I'm really happy to be here today. And so as he said, my name is Erin Smith, and I am a professional tarot reader. I have been doing readings for people since around 2010 or 2011. And as he mentioned, I built a caravan, which I read cards out of in the pre-COVID times and hopefully in the near future. And I built that caravan with a friend of mine in 2012. So it often gets parked in Atwater Village on the weekends, and people can come in and see me and either schedule an appointment or stop by. So tarot is a very rich tradition. It is a form of divination that is, interestingly, not that old. So the way that I'm going to structure this talk tonight is I'm going to go into a brief history. I'm not going to delve too deeply. For one, I don't consider myself a historian, and two, just to allow time for all the other sections of this talk, I want to touch on where tarot comes from and what time period it was conceived in, so it can contextually give you some idea of why it is conveying the things that it's conveying philosophically. Because where and how it originated has everything to do with how the cards derived their meaning. And so then we're going to go a little bit into the meaning of the cards and what they convey, because really what you're dealing with are, each card is a snapshot of a different state of human consciousness. And this is why when you put them together in a reading, it gives you so much information about what's going on in the life of the person that you're reading for. And then, you know, as Mark said, at the end, we're going to do a practical demonstration where I will walk you through my process of reading for others, and you'll have the opportunity to see in real time what it's like for a person to receive this kind of insight through the lens of tarot. So, so I'm going to start with the history, and I'm going to share my screen with you. I have a few slides just so that you can get a clear idea of dates and context. So bear with me. All right. So the history and practice of tarot. So the first thing I want to start with here is the history of paper. You know, there's an obvious reason for this, because tarot cards are printed on paper, right? One of the reasons that it's one of the later forms of divination is that paper had to be invented first. So paper, and as you'll see, some of the philosophy, I think, also originates in the place where paper was invented. So paper was actually invented in China around 100 BCE. So that's a long time ago. China is amazing. There was a very rich civilization going on in China at that time. After paper is invented, there's a period of time where it is sort of it continues to stay sort of located in China, and then it moves, paper production moves to India around 400 CE, and that's Common Era is what that's referring to. So then paper production moves to the Islamic world in 800 CE. And then around this time, people start making books. Prior to this time, written material was primarily printed on scrolls or papyrus in Egypt. And, you know, this was problematic. It was difficult to move ideas around in the form of printed word, because either the scrolls would get crushed, or with the papyrus, you would write on it and the ink would smudge, or it was easy to erase. So it was very hard to disseminate information until you could actually make books, because books were easy to move around. So in 1250 CE, Egyptian paper technologies, okay, so then at some point, you know, it's moved from the Islamic world, which is also around Egypt. Here, in fact, we can go to a map here. So what you can really see is paper traveled from China through India into the Islamic world, which is all of these areas, and then into Egypt. And really where this takes you, what you start to see is that these, you know, countries are connected, right? And here we have Egypt here, and it goes from Egypt into Italy. So it's really easy to see from these maps and through following the dates how paper technology moves through the world. So why am I making this point? Like, what's the importance of this? Well, just like goods and services traveled the Silk Road from country to country, so did ideas. And I think it's really important to state this, because a lot of times we think of traditions as being very separate and isolated from one another. But in fact, a lot of the ideas that you will find in tarot have similar roots in the I Ching and astrology. Hermetic philosophy in many ways has a lot of overlapping principles with Taoism, with Buddhism, and Hinduism. And again, all these ideas were traveling around the Silk Road and influencing one another over time. So here we go to divination practices. The I Ching, the oldest written reference to I Ching is in 800 BCE. And at the time, it was called Zhao Yi. That was how you pronounced it. And then it was later under the more Confucianist interpretation that the book was changed to what we know today to be I Ching, or Book of Changes. Astrology, also very old, not quite as old, is attributed to Zoroaster in the 300 BCE. So again, we're talking about written references. When you start to go down the rabbit hole of history, it's really intense, because a lot of different historians and scholars have contradictory views. They don't agree on specific dates. So these are general guidelines for when these things started to appear in the world. And the other thing you have to remember is that traditions were most likely alive and well long before they were written down. Like, for instance, there's archaeological evidence of the I Ching being cast with tortoise shells that were burned. And you see that going as far back as 1600 BCE. So, okay, so where does tarot fit in this pantheon? Well, like I said, because paper had to make its way through the world, so the other thing is that in China, playing cards were really the first place to show up in the world in China. And then as paper moved into the Islamic world, so did playing cards. And so the oldest known deck of playing cards is called the Malmuk deck. And it looks in some ways similar to tarot. It really looks like tarot without the major arcana. It has the pips, right? So it has something akin to the Ace of Cups, the Ace of Swords, the Ace of Wands, and the Ace of Pentacles. Like, swords are actually scimitars in the Malmuk deck, which are these sort of curved swords. And that's what the Islamic world would reference. But remember, there's no trumps, because this is just a game. And then the other thing that I want you to try to conceptualize when you're thinking of this game is that, this wasn't something that you would go down to the corner store and pick up and then play with your friends on the weekend. These depictions were commissioned by famous artists, famous local artists, and they were extremely expensive to produce. And there was no mass production at this time, right? So it would be much later that the printing press would come out and allow these things to be accessible to common people. So primarily people who played these games were royalty. People, the elites played these games. So for instance, here we go then to the oldest deck that most closely resembles the modern tarot is the Visconti Sforza deck. And again, it was still a game. It was commissioned by the Duke and Duchess of Milan. And it had most of the major arcana with the exception of the Devil and the Tower. But again, it was not considered a practice of divination. That under most circumstances, it was a game that most closely resembled bridge. It was kind of like bridge. So here's an important date for you. In 1781, we have the first written account of somebody talking about tarot within an occult context. So all of a sudden, this isn't just a game. This is a wisdom teaching, that people are transmitting some powerful information about the nature of the universe through these images that are printed on these cards. And the author is Antoine de Court de Gebelin is the guy's name. He's French, and he writes a book entitled Le Monde Primitif. And he claims that tarot is actually based on Egyptian philosophy, and that it's the distillation of the Book of Thoth. And, you know, he doesn't really have any proof. He's sort of looking at these images and he's making assumptions. And, you know, one question is, what right does he have to make these assumptions? And we're going to get to that in a minute, because we are going to talk about these meanings. Another thing that happens that's very interesting is that right after that, in 1783, there's another publication that comes out that is talking about, for the very first time, tarot as being a practice of divination. And that's by Jean-Baptiste Aliette. And his book is entitled A Way to Entertain Yourself with a Deck of Cards. And he was a professional tarot reader. So I'm not going to suggest that just because these books appeared at this time period, that nobody was practicing divination with their playing cards prior to this time. We just don't know for certain because there's no public record of it. But you know, divination practices seem to be quite old, right? That from the time that human beings formed, you know, relationships and formed, you know, collective societies, it seems like they have been looking for signs and patterns within their environment to give them some idea of what might transpire. And I mean, I really think that, you know, astrology is probably rightfully the oldest tradition. If you are a, you know, agrarian culture and, you know, your livelihood and your family's livelihood depends on, you know, the flourishing of crops, it makes sense that you're going to pay attention to where the constellations are as they're moving through the seasons and what's happening to your community as a collective when certain alignments are happening. And this is really about just like tracking data over an extended period of time. This is really how people start to match up certain historical conditions with these reoccurring patterns, whether they're in nature or whether they're in the I Ching, which is about, you know, throwing these trigrams or tetragrams, and then whether it, or the cards themselves, right? So Gebeline and Etier are essentially saying that these cards contain within them Hermetic principles, and I don't think that they're wrong. That these Hermetic principles are embedded in these cards in terms of what they represent. So these are the 7 Hermetic principles. If you don't know, like, so this is derived from the Hermetica, and this is supposedly written by Hermes Trismegistus, who is considered who is in Roman culture Mercury, or in Egyptian culture Thoth. And, you know, he is the one who brings knowledge. He invents language, he invents writing. So he disseminates wisdom throughout the world of humans, and he's considered somewhat of a god. So and the thing that I find most interesting about these principles is that they definitely have a corollary to other that they're culturally significant to other people. So for instance, the principle of mentalism, this idea that all matter stems from the mind. There's a corollary to this in Buddhism and Taoism, that the material nature of the universe is born out of consciousness. The principle of correspondences is this idea that everything is interconnected, that nothing is distinct and separate. And so if you do something to affect a change here, it will have a ripple effect that will play out through all of time and space and affect everyone who's connected. And this in Buddhism is called the law of dependent origination. So again, these ideas that were, you know, traveling around the Silk Road are very much tied to one another. And then you have the principle of vibration, which, you know, a lot of quantum physicists believe today, that everything is vibrating at a certain frequency, and that this is sort of determining the form of everything, like, you know, depending on what the frequency is. And in fact, you can even look into this with, I think it's called cymatics, which is the science of looking at what specific frequencies form shapes. Like, they essentially spread sand on a plate and then run a frequency through it, and it forms these elaborate mandala type patterns. So there seems to be some truth to that too. And then let's get into the principle of polarity and the principle of gender, because this is all throughout the tarot. This idea, in fact, I'm going to read you this one section out of the Hermetica so that you can get some idea. In the beginning, there is unity. Unity separates into two fundamental forces, which, like the negative and positive poles of a battery, generate everything. So, so what does that mean? Well, we see duality, by the way. Again, this is a concept that plays out in the Buddhist cosmology as well. We see duality in everything. There's the masculine and there's the feminine. And again, this plays out in the tarot imagery, for instance, in the Lovers. And what's so beautiful about these meanings is that they're multivalent, right? So the Lovers can mean divine right partnership, but they can also mean the balance between masculine and feminine, right? That we have this seeming duality. But remember, you need a man and a woman to create a baby. And so the idea of the masculine energy or the masculine force is assertive, right? It's in fact, I'm gonna get out of this now. So so that I can just talk to you. There we go. So the masculine force is an active principle. It asserts its will. It takes an action out in the world. And yes, it is represented literally by gender, but it is actually not specific to gender. All men and women have both a masculine and feminine principle. They embody that, right? So again, you know, the masculine principle is the action you take in the world. When you have a creative thought and you want to put it into practice and you want to make something new, you have to take an action. And that's considered a masculine force. The feminine force is the receptive force. It's the intuitive, and it's the ability to bring in insight. It's the humility that allows you to take in information and create a fertile space for it to grow to full fruition. It's a nurturing energy. So remember, one without the other is impotent. You need both of these energies to create new life. And again, this ideology is peppered all throughout the deck. In fact, the next card in the major arcana is the Chariot. And the Chariot driver is the one who is harnessing both lightness and darkness in order to move forward. And, you know, Carl Jung talks a lot about this. He talks about it in terms of integration, that you have to acknowledge these dark forces of your own psyche, these darker parts of your nature, which are within your subconscious, in order for you to take a precise and productive action out in the world. That if you have a lot of unprocessed trauma or disowned difficult material that you haven't really investigated in a conscious way, then it becomes this undercurrent that drives you in all of your actions, and it can create problems when you're moving in and about the world. So the Chariot driver is one who directs his will from this place of balance. And consequently, he's effective. He's able to bring things into being as the result of being in balance. And you see this peppered throughout the whole, you know, you have the Empress and the Emperor. which represent high states of this archetypal masculine or feminine form. Like she is literally pregnancy and fertility and fecundity. She is like the divine mother. And the emperor is the one who assumes the throne in his own life. He is empowered in a state of volition where he can take action in the world and bring things into being. Again, here with the high priestess, we have this energy of being deeply connected to your own intuition, being able to channel source from this place of nonlinear thinking, of not being about logic, but being about a deep internal connection to source. And she does this by balancing her lightness and her darkness. Again, it's this idea that she is the bridge between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind, which gives her her own sense of power. So absolutely, these Hermetic principles are being mirrored in the imagery. And by the way, what I'm showing you right now is called the major arcana. The tarot is essentially divided into two separate parts. There's the major arcana and the minor arcana. And the majors are, well, they're called trumps for a reason. And remember, the earliest modern tarot deck was Italian. And so in Italian, during the Renaissance, when these cards came out, there was a parade of triumphs that were these archetypal images, and they would move through the streets of Italy, and they represented different archetypal like principles, usually virtues. And so this is really what's being represented here with the major arcana. And and again, this idea of like, there's so many cards that relate to the power of the mind and how the mind will manifest things in the world, and why it's so important for one to master their own mind. And so so much of the time when certain cards will arise for people in a reading, I will give the prescription of meditation, because there is nothing that trains the mind more than practicing a single point of concentration. So the magician is really a perfect representation of this principle of mentalism, which we saw in the Hermetic principles. It's what it is saying is that when you direct your will, you can make things happen. You can create things in the world. And this was really the true idea of what magic was. Magic was less about an illusion and more about creating changes in the physical world based on what your intention was or what you did with your mind. And an untrained mind can create a lot of chaos and wreckage, right? In some ways, the magician is saying, be careful what you wish for, right? If you haven't trained your mind, and you can see he's doing this motion with his hands, as above, so below. And so what that means also is as within, so without. If my mind is cluttered and chaotic and governed by fear, and I have this sort of paranoid reaction to people in my environment, then I'm going to model that chaos out in the world. I'm going to bring it into my relationships. I'm going to bring it into the way that I go about doing my work in the world, and it will have an adverse effect. But if I align myself with the highest octave intention possible for myself, instead of being governed by fear or greed or worry, if I really affiliate myself with sort of the highest good for all involved, then I can also create heaven on earth. And this is very much what the Hermetic principles are pointing to. So another card that I like to talk about in terms of that is strength. And strength is really about taming the beast within. It is mastering your mind so that your mind doesn't master you. And again, it's making this acknowledgement. In fact, in Buddhism, they call it the monkey mind, right? This is what happens before you employ a practice of meditation to try to train your attention, is that it goes all over the place, right? You're like, oh, I forgot to turn off the stove. Oh, I need to do the dishes. Oh, I forgot to call back so-and-so, right? You're trying to stay focused on a task at hand and you keep getting pulled off in all these other directions. Well, strength is making you aware of this, and it's saying that this is a muscle, that just like weight training and building your strength physically, you have to form these repetitions in your mind of continuing to bring yourself back to this singular point of focus. And it's okay to acknowledge that your attention has drifted, but then you gently bring it back when you see that you've been captured by the mind and that you're now spiraling down the rabbit hole of despair, right? That essentially strength is saying not everything that your head tells you is helpful or true. And so it's essential to practice discernment, that strength gives you the ability to discern the true from the false. And so again, this is about training the mind. Now, where are we at? Where are we at with time? Because I do want to get to the minor arcana as well. So hopefully you're starting to get a sense of each of these cards being a visual representation of something that's going on, some principle, some organizing principle that's conveying some information about what's going on inside of you, right? So actually, let's just talk about some of the more difficult cards, shall we? Like, this guy is one of my favorites, right? If you look at him, you will see that these are actually the lovers, and they are in bondage to the devil instead of being blessed by the angel. And why might that be, right? Well, what is that? So here we have the lovers that, as I said, were a representation of balance, right? This combination of masculine and feminine energies that is equally matched. And here they are in chains. And so the representation of the devil is really about materialism. It's getting lost in materialism. And I think of it as a representation of what we think of as modern day addiction. So most people think of addiction as being about substances, right? I'm a heroin addict. I must have heroin or else I feel sick and I can't go on. I can't function in the world. And of course, I take it into my body and it only works for a minute. And then, I need more and more and more. It is the worst kind of bondage, right? You are essentially a slave to the craving that you must feed. But remember, there are a lot of things in life to be addicted to. And so the essential meaning of the devil is, where have you given your power away to outside forces? So it can look a lot like this. It can look like an essential feeling of I'm not enough. I'm not lovable until I get that specific person to love me. I have no value unless I get those accolades to define me. I can't be happy in the world until I have this amount of money in the bank. It is essentially giving your power away to people, places, and things that exist external to you. And it is ignoring the fact that essentially you are complete and whole within yourself. The devil is trying to get you to recognize where in life you've given your power away to something other than this sense of I am complete and whole. That nothing and no one can make or break you. Nothing needs to be fixed because nothing is broken. This is the message of the devil. And so once you understand that this is sort of a prison of your own making, if you will, then you can also notice that these chains around their necks are very loose and not very constricting. That in some ways, once you have the realization that this is a lie that you've been living, then you can simply lift the chains up off of yourself. And so, so again, even some of the more difficult cards have this seed of insight that is embedded within them, that is trying to get you to see something about where you may have gone astray in your life. And so it's giving you guidance about how to take back your own sense of volition in the world. Another one that, in fact, I'll just do both of these because these tend to cause a lot of concern in people when they come up in readings, and largely because they're not seeing them within a bigger context. So Death and Tower actually have somewhat of a similar meaning. It is connoting the end of something. And it can literally be the end of a person. It can be literally about death at times, although that seems to be very rare. Of all the thousands of readings that I've given to people, a really minute number of them have been going through some kind of death. And in fact, I would be a lot more likely to interpret this card as a death if it were accompanied by something like the Three of Swords. It would be reasonable to read this as you are, that the loss of something or someone is causing you tremendous grief. Although the truth is that whenever we lose anything, whether it's a person that we love or even a sense of ourselves, you know, an identity, a story I often tell in association with death is that imagine that you are a ballet dancer, and from the time that you're 5 you've been trained in ballet, and you spend, you know, all of your waking hours in the studio, and you learn all these combinations, and you're about ready to join a company at the age of 16, and you injure your knee and you can never dance again. It's reasonable for you to go into a period of tremendous grief at the idea of losing this identity that was so much a part of who you believed yourself to be in the world. But the thing that both of these cards possess, what it's saying is that, yes, there's a closing of a chapter. Something is being lost. Something is being dramatically shifted in your life and will never be the same. But they are also indicative of the beginning of a new chapter. So it's also, you know, in death, and I think that all of these philosophical traditions would say that this is true, that there is no real death, that the death of the body, the death of this form is really a portal into another dimensional reality. And so the important thing to remember when you're going through either death or tower energy is that to allow yourself the process of grieving, whatever it is that you're experiencing as a loss, but also to stay open to the idea that some new opportunities are coming out of this closing of a chapter. So, so again, these are sort of the ways that you talk to people, because inevitably, you know, this is the other thing, the question that I get asked quite a bit, especially when I'm reading at events, is people will ask me, you know, I don't want to hear anything bad, you know, like, what do you do if bad cards come up? I'm like, well, look, they have to exist. Remember, if you are having all these different images that are there to represent everything that might happen over the course of a human life, how empty and shallow and flat would this system be if there was nothing there to describe? Imagine that you had just lost a loved one, and there was nothing there to accurately reflect your pain from the universe. You would feel cheated. You would feel like you weren't being witnessed in an authentic way. So these cards must exist, but I always say it's never the end of the story. In fact, I often use this analogy, like, people sort of think that life is like a game show, right? Behind door number 1 is all the cash and prizes, and behind all the other doors, it's game over. And of course, course, it doesn't look like that. Behind every door is an infinite ripple effect of more choices. And some of those choices will be difficult and some of them will be beneficial. And the thing that tarot is trying to get people to do is become more conscious of their choices, to become aware of the energies that are arising and coalescing in their lives, and then to look at how they might be playing into those energies and how might they most skillfully work with those energies in order to choose wisely where it is that they want to go and how it is that they want to approach these different areas of life. So I want to try to maybe, I just want to get to, I'm just going to basically go into the way that the minor arcana is represented. I want to talk about just the four elements, because the four elements are represented. Cups are the element of water, and they represent emotions, intuition, love, their relational cards. Swords are the element of air, and they represent thoughts, ideas, communication. And so in a reading, you know, whenever you're conceiving of an idea or whether you're up in your head, a lot of times sword energy will arise to bring your attention to where you might need to have some more balance. Wands are representing fire, the element of fire, and they represent creativity and passion and life force energy. So it's the inspiration that you draw to take an action in the world to bring something into being or create something new. And then pentacles represent the element of earth. And so they represent the materialization of wealth and resources. They also represent our bodies. It's the physical, material, tangible elements of life, which is also why they tend to represent a livelihood, how people earn their living, how they take care of their bodies as the result of earning a living from the work that they do in the world. So that gives you kind of a brief overview. Obviously, I would need many more hours to talk about every single card in the deck, right? And so, and I do really want to get to these demonstration readings so that you can see what a reading looks like in action. And I'm going to take you through my process as a reader and how I drop into a space where I'm opening up the channel in order to interpret the cards for somebody. So Mark, do you want to, I allowed Mark to choose the participants just because he could do that while I was talking. And also that way you would know that I hadn't picked a shill. So I want you to all know this is legit. Mark, do you want to let me know who the first person is?
Yeah, I'm having a little bit of a technical problem. I'm just adjusting. So
Okay.
if you want to talk a little bit more, like another 5 minutes, about the minors or the suites,
Sure.
that'd be good. I'm almost there. My phone ran out of data that I was using the phone to show the cards, but I'm just rearranging, so should be okay in a moment. Okay.
I have lots more to say. Bear with me. So again, the way that I like to think in terms of like the cards and how they present themselves in a reading, I think of the major arcana as being bigger overarching themes that affect your soul. Like they seem to be giving you a more general sense of where your life is going and things that you have to pay attention to. What I think about the minors is being, this is sort of like day-to-day kind of interactions. It's sort of the minutia of your daily life, right? What actions you're taking, how you're showing up in your relationships, what it is. And so like, for instance, I love this one. So the Four of Cups represents being so narrowly focused on your plan that you are sort of missing these miracles that are being presented to you from the universe at all times, right? It's sort of like, here he is, you can see him, he's kind of like got his legs crossed and he's sort of staring at these cups in front of him like, you know, it needs to come in like this and it needs to be on these terms and it has to have this appearance and it has to be in this time frame. And he's so focused on this one specific way that he wants to experience the world that in fact, he's not aware of the fact that we as human beings are given opportunities all the time to align with our highest good. And to some degree, in order to take advantage of those opportunities, we have to open up to them. We have to understand that I, from my limited human perspective, do not have the bird's eye view on my life all the time. I can drop into it at times through my intuition or my connection to source. And then I can somehow, the picture widens. I can get more information than it's just coming through my five senses. But the more rigid I am in my expectations of the world, the less available I am to that energy. And that's really what the Four of Cups is representing here. You need to zoom out. You need to allow for infinite possibility and not think that there's only one way that this can play out in your life. Okay, so there's another one I really want to talk about because this comes up in readings for people a fair amount, and it's one that I very much relate to. And it's not an easy energy, actually. It's the Five of Pentacles. So I want to talk about this one because nobody likes to see this card. When this card comes up in a reading, it's intense because of the emotional quality of the Five of Cards. So most people who look at this card identify as the orphans. If you can see them, look, they are destitute. They have been cast out by society. They are alone in the world and they're wandering through the snow and they don't have any shoes. And it is this desperate feeling of longing for nourishment, for belonging. It's this sense of being on the outside of society and never having your needs met. And when this comes up in a reading, I've also come to understand through the thousands of readings that I've given that there are certain characteristics that are true when this card shows up in a reading. In general, this card isn't just about the person I'm reading for. It's actually more like a familial wound. It's almost like an epigenetic tendency to feel like there's not enough, right? And I liken it to having a distant family member that went through the Great Depression. And the reason I say that is that when you have that deep of a traumatic experience around a lack of resources, that it causes a kind of cognitive distortion. That even once the situation gets corrected, even once people have jobs and there's like a paycheck coming in, they're still hoarding food. Because really they relate to the world as like, there's not enough. I'm not enough. There's not enough for me. It's not going to work out. And so this energy is being conveyed through the imagery of the card, but so is the solution. They're walking past a church that's lit from within. And the representation is showing you the lights are on and the doors are open and all are welcome to come inside and avail themselves of the help they need in order to thrive. So it's inviting them to come in and have a bowl of soup. Are you hungry? Come have a bowl of soup, you know? Are you cold? Come and be warmed by our fire. Are you lonely? Come be welcomed into the fold of our congregation. The issue is not so much that there aren't opportunities in order for you to get to a better place. The issue is that you cannot take advantage of those opportunities if you believe that the good things in life are for everyone else and not for you. And so what this card is inviting you to do is reframe the way that you're experiencing the world and to understand that you are invited to the feast. But in order to go, you have to accept the invitation. And so it just trains your mind to look for the helpers, to look for the opportunities. Spirit says they're there. It's just that they feel completely far away or inaccessible because of some deep wound that you've incurred, and that this is your work to not stay there, to not stay in the wound, to open up to the idea that you can flourish. So that's a really intense card. And like I said, I relate to that card on a deep level from my own personal experience. So that happens a lot for me when I'm reading for people, is that I recognize myself in these states of human consciousness. And the more deeply I can connect with that in myself, the more I can convey the sensitive information that's coming up for people in a reading. And I can let them know that I understand, right? That there's a connection there. In fact, reading is really, has shown me over and over again how intimately connected we can be in a relatively short period of time. I can't even tell you, people would come on my truck, people I had never met before, and I would see these very personal details of their life that were being played out in the cards, and I would just feel this connection to them. And oftentimes I would cry, and then they would cry, and then by the end of the reading, we would embrace one another. You know, this would happen on such a regular basis that it occurs to me that one of the most healing elements of this practice is this deep sense of being witnessed by spirit and being witnessed by another human being, that there's something tremendously healing that happens for people in that process.